honor to. Okay. Just question.
You're walking in with them. No? Okay, then they'll be, who's going to file them in then?
So just wait for him?
Yeah, just wait. I'll go grab them.
Okay. If you'd like to welcome our candidates to the stage. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Toronto Region Board of Trade's 2022 mayoral debate. I'm Jan De Silva, the board's president and CEO. As we begin, I acknowledge the land we're meeting on is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. It's a pleasure to have all of you join us here today and to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I'm not going to name you all, but I will call out just a couple. Our Deputy Mayor, Anna Bailau. Anna. And my board chair, the CEO of Mars Discovery District, Young Wu, is joining us here as well. I'd also recognize and like to thank our principal sponsors who make events such as this possible. Scotiabank, SNC-Lavalin, the Globe and Mail, and University of Toronto. A round of applause for them, please. This election comes at a critical juncture for our city, our region, and our nation. As we move from 2 years of pandemic into today's challenging geopolitical and domestic environment for recovery, the pressure has never been greater. Without a doubt, we are so fortunate to live here. Our region is the 4th largest in North America, our city the fastest growing, and we are Canada's commercial center. However, the challenges facing our growing population, our economic competitiveness, and our fiscal situation are not well understood across the country, nor dare I say, even across the city. Without question, the role of Mayor of the City of Toronto is the most complex one in the country. For our mayor is the only role on council elected with a citywide mandate. Toronto City Councillors are elected to represent their wards and neighborhoods. This system of governance is commonplace in small and mid-sized cities in the U.S., not in the major urban economic centers against whom Toronto competes. Even the mayors of Montreal and Vancouver operate under different models of authority. Founded in 1845, the Board of Trade is one of the largest and most influential metro chambers in North America. We advocate on behalf of our members for policies that advance growth and competitiveness. It's fair to say that the board is both a partner and admittedly sometimes a pain to the City of Toronto. Throughout all, we're fully committed to a productive and supportive relationship. For solutions to livability, income disparity, and business competitiveness are more compatible than not. Before turning things over to Steve, I'd like to share observations critical to our members and to our economic future that relate to our upcoming elections. The first is fiscal ownership and responsibility. Too often, issues dealt with at the provincial level are downloaded to the city. Huge and critical expenses, such as homelessness, highways, and creating the conditions for investment. Our ability to pay for them, especially as these issues expand and never contract, are limited and unsustainable. The second is the geography of our economic zone. Municipalities across our region face intractable cross-boundary issues that cannot be solved by one single municipality. Think transit and fare integration, the movement of goods, land use, planning for homes and for jobs. Our workers and our businesses are not neatly confined within the boundaries our cities are mandated by history to service. And finally, urgency. Our city and our regional population has been the fastest growing over the past decade, with 3 million more people expected over the next 15 years. Enabling this requires a plan for growth, which sits outside the mandate of any one city. These issues require a coalition of city mayors, councils, and their business communities to work with other orders of government to take action. These are all things to be mindful of as we cast our votes. And with that, I'm extremely pleased to introduce our moderator, TVO Steve Paikin. My Uber driver knew who he was as I was on my way here today. This is a person who understands politics and policy like no other. Now, having been on the receiving end of his interviews, I have enormous respect for Steve's informed professionalism and his ability to dig deep into the questions of the day. Steve, thank you so much for moderating our debate. The microphone is yours.
Thank you my cousin was driving you today, right? That's how it knew who it was. That explains it. Okay. Thank you, Jan. Without further ado, let's introduce the candidates. And please, everybody, hold your applause till the end. Gil Penalosa is the founder and chair of 880 Cities. Stephen Punwasi is the co-founder and so-called chief data nerd of Better Dwelling. Sarah Climenhaga is an entrepreneur, environmentalist, and change advocate. Chloe Brown, policy analyst at the Future Skills Center. And John Tory has the job the other four want. Please welcome everybody now to the stage. I'm not going to waste everybody's time here going through the rules and the regulations and all that. Suffice to say, the candidates know the rules. The audience and those watching on television will figure it out quickly enough. We can say that we drew lots for podium positions and order of responses, so that's all done very evenly. There is a clock on the floor, candidates. Please stick to time. I hate to interrupt, but I will to make sure everybody gets equal time. There is an audience here. Audience, please be respectful. No heckling unless it's incredibly witty, okay? All right. The questions will be short, so we save as much time as possible for responses and debate, and with that, let's go. Public transit. What needs doing? Gil Penalosa, you're up first.
I have worked in over 350 cities around the world in all continents, and everywhere some of the topic is sustainable transportation. Here the province is doing subways and LRTs. Some of them are not the ones that I think we should do, but that's another topic. We are doing fast lane. That's what we're proposing, 62 kilometers of BRT. By the way, fast traffic is not if the wheels are rubber or metal, it's if they have dedicated lanes, prepaid and easy in and out, and fast lane has everyone. Also, immediately, we are gonna give priority to all of the streetcars, as on Spadina or St. Clair. As the streetcar approaches, the light is gonna turn green because we need priority. We're gonna work with all of the buses. We're gonna create over 300 kilometers of protected bike lanes, and most important, walking, because every one of those trips begins and ends walking.
Thank you, Mr. Penalosa. John Tory, you are next. Now, let's not do this, folks, or we won't have any time for discussion. We know you love them all. Okay, Mr. Tory.
I think in simple terms, we have to get people back on transit and build more. We have to resume the service, which we have done as a city. Unlike other cities, we've even added bus routes, 17 new ones since the pandemic came to an end. We have to continue the support the city's given. The operating support from the city to the TTC is up 45% over the 8 years that I've been mayor. We have to invest. The capital is up from $6.5 billion to $12 billion over the time that I've been the mayor. We have to continue the incentives that we've had in place, which include things like the hop-on, hop-off and the discounted fares for low-income people. We have to build, and that really is one of the fundamental things I'm seeking a mandate to make sure happens in this election, which is to take the unprecedented three-government deal to build all kinds of transit all over the city and actually get it done. We have to convert our fleet over so that we're achieving some of our environmental objectives, and I think that's going to have some cost implications that are positive. And last but not least, I'll just finish on saying we have to get people back to their place of work to a greater extent, because the transit
Thank you,
system
Mr.
depends
Tory.
on that as well as downtown.
Sarah Climenhaga, a minute to you now.
I believe we need to drop mandatory fares, first for seniors, then for the rest of the city. Every transit trip saves the city money. We shouldn't have any barriers in the way to ride transit. I believe we need to make accessibility a huge priority. It's not. We are still shutting too many people out of our transit system, which is bad for the city and bad for the people who are being shut out. We need to make low-cost rapid transit routes throughout the city on every major route. And I say low cost because I don't mean many years of delay or many hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean low cost solutions to giving transit priority. And finally, we need to sustainably fund transit. When I mention fare-free transit, people say, oh no, we can't afford that. But we have a serious funding problem at the TTC already. So we need to sustainably fund it, and we need to work with residents on all the different ways that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Punwasi, a minute to you.
So to reach our climate goals, we need to get more people on public transit, and for that to happen, it needs to be fast, efficient, and cost-effective. Currently, it's none of those things, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that it's poorly financed. We can't ask taxpayers to start paying more right now. We're going into a recession. So that's why we need to diversify revenues. That's why I'm proposing that we take the surplus TTC land and then turn it into city-owned shopping malls, offices, and even housing, and produce a recurring dividend that we can use to finance our transits, both operation and expansion. Tokyo does this, and they generate about 30% of the operating revenue for their system.
Thank you. Chloe Brown, you have the last word in this first question.
So for transit, what I'm proposing is changing the composition of the TTC board. Right now, there is a lack of representation of TTC workers making transit plans. Additionally, I would go for dollar fares, so getting young people, seniors, all to pay $1 for their 2-hour transfer window. That would be a more democratic approach to raising revenue. Additionally, looking at taking all the parking levies, having that fund the reconstruction of the roads so that they're age-ready and they're pedestrian-friendly. And I would also look at the Connected Corridor project, which is currently being run out of UC Berkeley. And what that does, it turns a network of traffic sensors into a neural network so that our streets are connecting with us. One of the benefits that Uber has over public transit is that there is an agreed upon exchange of data, and I would like for TTC to be competitive with Uber by having digital equity agreements where users are informing the development of smarter transit networks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have 9 minutes of open discussion, civilized open discussion. Stephen Punwasi, you can start off, and then the others will join in as needs be.
So the rule is the first of us to get to the top of the cage wins. Is that what? I get to elaborate on my idea.
You can
okay.
start, and then the others will join in.
Sweet. So Toronto currently has a terrible, terrible, terrible transit system. Right now, we have the second longest commute in the world. It's tied with Bogota, and this drains our productivity. If we develop these TTC lands, we increase our economic capacity across the city. We also sort of distribute this opportunity so that everyone doesn't have to be crammed into downtown, and we can reduce the number of trips, and we can increase the capacity without actually increasing traffic.
Okay,
Yeah.
that feels like a good place to allow somebody else to come in. Who else wants in? Gil, go ahead.
I found it interesting that no one mentioned the word walking when every single transit trip or every single car or bike begins and ends by walking. We need to make walking safe and enjoyable. I'm proposing a neighborhood city, a city where anybody has all their basic needs, the park, the food, the grocery store, the restaurant, the library, within walking distance. And this is doable. In Paris, they call it the 15-minute city. In Portland, the 20-minute city. No, I call it the neighborhood city. We're going to strengthen the neighborhoods, and we're going to strengthen walking. We're going to lower the speed in all the neighborhood streets to 30 kilometers an hour. Because if anybody gets hit by a driver at 30 kilometers an hour, there is 5% probability of being killed. At 50 kilometers an hour, there is over 85%. We need to make our cities safe. And if we want people to use public transit, we need to be able to walk to public transit.
You have no way to pay for any of that, though.
absolutely, we need a walkable city. There's no question. I totally agree. I just want to elaborate a little bit more on dropping mandatory fares because people kind of are getting more and more comfortable with that idea. Boston has some routes that are no mandatory fares. So the reason it won't cripple the TTC is we've already got, again, a funding issue with TTC. So we need to talk about how will we raise revenue across the board. Why should it be the rider that's paying when, again, the rider is saving the city money? And there's another issue with, I wouldn't say the TTC is terrible. There are issues, but I take the TTC every day. I think we're very lucky. But why do we spend our staff resources on penalizing the poor, on fare conflict? Most operator assaults come from fare conflict. So let's use our staff to be ambassadors, to go through the stations and make sure people are safe. So I think that there's so many benefits that would come out of dropping the mandatory fares while we look at how to sustainably fund the TTC.
I'm sorry, I gotta challenge what Sarah's saying because Boston's been able to do that because Boston has a very different government and its subsidy levels are completely different as well. So while it may sound good to have free fares, the reality of it is that the TTC is bleeding money because of the leadership is lacking. One of the things that I've come to learn from talking to transit workers is that the composition of the TTC board is not really focused on improving the service for users as much as it is in generating money. And this is why I'm saying we need workers on the board. We have too many people that are planning transit without a transit engineering degree, without a civil engineering degree, and this is why we're in the problems that we are. It's time to take politics out of transit planning and actually look at how do we redesign roads so that they're pedestrian friendly, so that they're age ready, meaning that having even sidewalks, regular snow removal, making sure that residents can track this in their phone is also really important. So raising digital literacy around transit planning is a very big, it's a really big priority of mine because when I think about ride sharing, I willingly give my information to Uber to improve that service. Why doesn't the TTC have anything like that? And it's because of the lack of leadership. Instead of actually looking to users and saying hey, what is it that you need? What times do you get up in the morning and when do you need that bus? They're not doing that. It's TTC going to Twitter, Facebook, and getting all those comments and making decisions off of that. We need to change who leads.
You mentioned Sarah in your response, so I should give her a chance to respond, and then Mr. Tory, if he wants in.
Oh, I just wanted to say that the how we do these things is always negotiable. We always talk about, well, what's the best way to fund it? So just because there are problems with funding right now doesn't mean free fare, dropping the mandatory fares is not a good idea. So I just want to encourage everyone, we can always find the solution. It's the will behind it that is lacking.
Mr. Tory.
Well, Steve, your original question was, of course, what do we do to get people on transit and about transit? And I said we've got to resume service and restore service levels and continue the support. But the other thing I made reference to was building transit. And even on this platform today, you have people that are saying, well, I have a slightly better idea as to how the transit plan should be put together. And, there are ideas that are all worth discussing. But the fact is, for the first time ever in the history of this city, we have the three governments have agreed on a transit plan, and they've agreed on where it's to go and how it's to be paid for. And what I'm seeking in this election is a mandate to make sure we proceed with that plan. And we don't do what Torontonians have done so many times before, which is one person has one idea and they pull a part out of the plan, or they say, I have a better idea and I want to start negotiating to change the plan. We have a plan. Three governments have agreed to it. I was the head of one of those governments. We're now having to get on with building it. It's under construction right across the city. And it is not the time, in my view, to change that plan. It is a time to move forward, build the transit, and then, frankly, get on with making the next plan for the next series of things we have to do. Because, again, as Torontonians, we have a habit of building something and then standing back and admiring it and congratulating ourselves for 5 or 10 years before getting on with the next plan.
All right,
Let's get the present plan built now so that people can be riding on that transit in short order.
Mr. Penalosa, then Ms. Brown.
I find it curious that Mr. Tory's transit plan is to have his eyes on the province's transit plan, nothing for the city. And only when it works. For example, when the Eglinton LRT keeps being delayed and overcost, then he doesn't own it. When they're going to inaugurate something, then he's right there. So either you own it or you don't own it. The same Eglinton West, it was designed and contracted was going to be above ground. One day, Doug Ford wakes up and says, what if we put it underground? It's going to cost only $2.4 billion. And Mr. Tory said nothing. He didn't even accept to send communications to Premier Ford. If I had been mayor, I would have gone to Eglinton with a gigantic train mug with all of the 2.4, all of the zeros, so that people know how much 2.4 billion. And said, Premier Ford, thank you for putting 2.4 billion into public transit, but don't bury it. Same train, same speed, fewer stations.
Okay,
Let's put more transit in Etobicoke, in York, and in Scarborough. Let's not bury $2.4 billion.
I'm going to give Mr. Tory a chance to respond, and then Ms. Brown gets the last word in
I'll
this
just
segment.
say that the plan is a partnership, and we all came to an agreement. Everybody had to put a bit of wine in their water, and everybody had things that they wanted to see done. But the bottom line is we agreed on a plan among 3 governments, never been done before, and on how to pay for it. And I would just say this, you're hearing sounds of people who want to change that plan. And I'm saying to you, we have to proceed with the plan that we've agreed to, because otherwise we fall into the trap that we've been in before. And I think it is just crucial that we move forward. I have the experience of working with the other governments, being a part of that partnership, and I want to finish the job for once in this city to actually get a plan built that we've agreed to build.
Thanks, Ant. Thank you. Ms. Brown, to you.
So John Tory's Smart Track is a mix of the Big Move, which was published by Metrolinx about 15 years ago now, and a mix of Transit City, which was David Miller's. For him to say that he's the only person to get transit moving would be a lie. There have been successive mayors that have come through and have pitched government different ideas. The only reason why it's working now is because Doug wants subways. So it's just him living out Doug Ford's dream right now, and Doug luckily is in the position to get that to happen. Smart Track hasn't worked, and that was his idea. So I really am just blown away that this is the position he's taking when he introduced Smart Track, 8 years ago, and it still hasn't happened?
Okay,
People forget in this plan, Steve, that the city is putting up a huge amount of money as well. We're putting up money for the state of good repair, and they allowed us to keep the money we've collected from the city building fund and put it into state of good repair, while the province paid for and the federal government paid for the actual construction of the new lines. That's the reality.
Audience, please. Thank you. Okay.
We have 20 seconds. I'm just going to jump in to say it's also about doing things that are ready right now. I was in Scarborough and there was a big sign saying, coming soon, the subway. And we all know the subway's not coming soon. It's not here tomorrow or next year. It's many years away. So what I'm proposing is we do stuff right now. If we have good plans, let's go with them. But we can do more right now than wait for plans that are years away.
Very good. Candidates, thank you. That is the end of our time to debate transportation. We now move on to our second question, which is about housing. I'm told 70% of Toronto neighborhoods apparently have antiquated zoning bylaws that prohibit modest increases in density. And I wonder whether any of the 5 of you plan to do anything about that. And in this second segment, the speaking order starts with John Tory.
Well, it is explicitly in my 5-point plan for housing. And it comes from a belief that I think we all would have, that our children should be able to live in the same neighborhoods that they grew up in, that older people, when they downsize, should be able to stay in the neighborhoods in which they've lived. And that means increasing supply. The affordability problem is as a result of the good old law of supply and demand. And so we have to increase supply, and one of the ways in which we're going to do it, to go back to your question, is that we have to do 2 things that are part of my 5-point plan, which I'll refer to in particular. 1, we have to make it as a right to build mid-rise development housing, and including a substantial component of affordable housing on busy streets, transit corridors, and so on. We simply can't have a choice anymore between a 50-story tower and a 2-story home. And the second thing we have to do is broaden out across the city, in that 75% that you talked about, the option for a duplex or a triplex. This is not a revolutionary concept. There are, in neighborhoods today, there are duplexes and triplexes and modest-sized apartment buildings that fit in. They've been there a long time,
Thank you,
and we
Mr.
need more
Tory.
of them.
That's time. Sarah Climenhaga, you're next.
I think there's a lot of agreement about what we need to do on housing, but why haven't we done it yet? And to me, that's the key issue, is we have to unlock City Hall, and we have to do it now. And the strong mayor powers won't make a difference, because as far as I know, the mayor has won almost every important vote that has ever been wanted. So what isn't being done? So I think, to unlock vacant housing, first of all, we unlock vacant units that exist in the city already. And I think people have been talking about a vacancy tax. It's a great idea. Get those vacant units open. Legalize housing. We've got illegal rooming houses. That's crazy. We can't protect tenants. We need to legalize housing. We need to remove permits for minor projects for homeowners. So we've said laneway housing, but I can tell you, as someone with a laneway possibility, it's extremely difficult, lengthy, costly process to try and actually put in laneway housing. So we can change all that by simply eliminating as much as possible, cutting red tape for real. Thank you.
Stephen Punwasi, next minute to you.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't believe in strong mayor powers because I believe in democracy. We need more affordable housing and we need it fast, but we can't get it from, the industry's already demonstrated that they will not build it. As soon as prices started to drop, they canceled 4,000 units, and we can blame that on cost overruns and inflation, but the reality is, in 2018, they also did this, and this isn't really an issue of we've run out of zoning. They're literally just canceling the apartments, and they're doing this to maintain a price floor. They need that 13% margin, which is good business, but it's bad city building. So that's why I'm proposing that we, instead of selling off our city land for cheap to developers, we actually develop it into a revenue-neutral, city-owned, purpose-built rentals. And yeah, we'll develop rent-stabilized apartments. When they stop building, we'll ramp it up and we'll drive rents down even further. Housing's infrastructure, and we can't let the industry just throttle the city and have it die.
Thank you, Mr. Punwasi. Thank you, Mr. Punwasi. Chloe Brown, you're up next.
So just to start, I don't blame the development industry for not building housing. One of the biggest problems is that residents groups can go to the Ontario Land Tribunal and for $400 stop into development. So it's honestly like, it's a two-prong approach where it's just like we need to direct the city solicitor to limit appeals that are filed that are not based on an sound engineering or architectural arguments. We need to, on top of changing rezoning, I'm trying to implement a land value tax, which is something that Metrolinx looked into during the big move as a land capture mechanism. So that means instead of taxing the properties that are on the land, we tax the land itself. That'll allow us to create a stabilized tax rate, and also it will allow us to use data to drive the way that we create revenue. Additionally, when we talk about tenants, yes, legalizing rooming houses is important, but as it stands, the rent-safe system doesn't even cover public and private tenants, so we need to change that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Penalosa.
First, I want to invite the citizens to see what John Tory has done or not in the last 8 years, because what he's talking about now, he has not done any of that, nothing in the last 8 years. Actually, affordable housing has been a huge failure. He created housing now. They don't even have one shovel on the ground, not one. He's been there for 8 years. So I think that, every one of us knows someone that is leaving Toronto because they cannot afford a house. I have an artist, Marianne, a friend of mine, now living in Hamilton, and people are going everywhere. I have three main pillars. One, renovation revolution. I have friends that are empty nesters. They want to age in place, like 99% of the aging people, but they cannot afford. Now they can split their home in 4, live in 1, rent out the other 3. We have arterials to densify all of the arterials. As of right, developers are going to save 3 to 4 years, are going to build faster and cheaper, and in public land, 100% affordable or deep affordable.
Mr. Penalosa, that's your time. We can get into more detail now in the 9-minute open debate portion. Chloe Brown, you get the first word in that, and then Mr. Tory, I think we need to hear you respond to the allegations just made.
Okay, so my question is to Mr. Penalosa about the renovation revolution, because this is something that's been available to homeowners since a very long time. The issue is the incentive. Because it's so expensive to develop a secondary suite, how are you going to change that financial incentive? And then secondly, if you're going to be a public developer, where are you going to find the money for that? Because right now, with the revenue as it is, I do not see the city in a place to fully develop all of this affordable housing on its own, unless we're creating our own construction company as well. And then my third thing is, what is your stance on actually creating a technology-driven permit system? Because I really feel for developers. It's not your fault that the government hasn't invested in the technology that it would take to make the permit system faster and more equitable to your
let's
industry.
get some responses. Mr. Penalosa.
Well, first, it's not true that it's available now. You can do secondary homes in your backyard, which is very expensive and takes a lot of time. What I'm saying is that if you want to age in place and you have a big house and you cannot afford it, you can split it in four as of right. We're going to have a one-stop shop at City Hall where we will answer all your questions, financial, legal, design, and we're going to have thousands and thousands of units. Imagine people all over the city. 80% of our city is only for single-family zoning. Now we're going to allow citywide to be able to subdivide. We're going to end with exclusionary zoning. The owners are going to benefit because now they're going to have income for life renting out those 3 additional units. Who's going to do the renovation? Medium-sized contractors. So the medium-sized contractors generating lots of employment. And the biggest benefit is going to be for renters that are going to have possibilities to live anywhere in the city. And as for the arterials, I'm going to allow also as of right to densify based on the width of the road. So developers are going to save 3 to 4 years. They're not going to waste time in lawyers and negotiating and all kinds of things. They're going to skip 4 years. There's going to be a lot more housing, and this is going to be housing where people are going to be able to live. And I think a lot of these issues are appealing to everybody. We have not had clear rules.
Okay,
and finally, in the plan that is public, it has to be 100% affordable. 2/3 affordable, 1/3 deep affordable, not market rate on the land that all of us own.
Okay, Mr.
I've
Penalosa
never
made
seen-
some, stand by one, because Mr. Penalosa made a comment saying that John Tory's record was an affordable housing failure, and I should give him a chance to respond to that.
Well, to put some facts on the table, Steve, the fact is, as of today, there are 19,000 affordable housing units in development. There have been built in the last 2 years, and this is crucial to our efforts to help people who are experiencing homelessness, 3,800 supportive housing units. People are living in most of that 3,800 today, living in it today. This has been an extraordinary effort. We have, over the last couple of years, approved garden suites, laneway suites, which have been referenced. We have already in place a vacant home tax to free up some of those units for the rental market. But the key going forward is, and this is what I'm seeking a mandate on, the 2 most important elements of the 5-point plan are to put in place a zoning regime that would have people able to build mid-rise development on busy corridors, as has been discussed by others, and secondly, and very importantly, to expand the range of housing options available in neighborhoods across the city to include triplexes, duplexes. You know, there are neighborhoods today, Beaches, Forest Hill, Rosedale, Leaside, North Toronto, where you can find all over the place duplexes and triplexes that have been there for decades. And all of a sudden, somehow it became a bad thing. They fit in well, and they can be done sensitively going forward, but we need that housing. And I think that we are going to change the rules. I'm seeking a mandate to change those rules to make sure going forward we do the building and the approval in a sensitive way, but much faster. And that's another part of the plan to dramatically speed up the approval process for housing.
Stephen Punwasi, you wanted in.
John, that sounds like a great plan. You should have done it over the past 8 years.
I indicated to ladies and gentlemen some things that I have done, the council has done under my leadership. Laneway suites, garden suites, more affordable housing. We have actually surpassed by many times over the number of affordable units in the system and supportive housing units of previous administrations all put together. So we're hard at work on this, but these important changes in the 5-point plan, in addition, another of the points is to offer more land to the cooperative housing, the nonprofit sector that builds cooperative housing, and offer up more city land for that. But these are the things that are going to help address both supply and thereby affordability.
We haven't heard from Sarah
repeated 3
Climenhaga.
times the
So
word
I'm just going to
anyways.
jump
We
in
haven't-
here since I haven't spoken yet on this question. One thing I wanted to mention, following up from what Chloe was saying about this fact that residents can appeal things and slow them down and delay. So I think we need to take a totally different approach. Rather than saying, oh, the residents should lose, or oh, the developers should lose. Should be win-win for both. Residents have told me consistently they're not opposed to housing. They're opposed to the problems that come with poorly done housing. They're opposed to too much traffic, not enough green space. So we can have developers and residents in the room from the beginning in the city so that these problems get ironed out before the building starts and then with smooth sailing after that. So I think there's a lot of room for participation. I just wanted to say about this issue of a mandate, we want a mandate to go forward for 4 years. No, I think that democracy is more than one vote and then we do what we want for 4 years. Democracy is residents have to be involved all the time. If they want their neighborhoods to look a certain way, let's work with them on that. So there's so many opportunities for housing, both right away, as Gil mentioned, having homeowners be able to create more units, and also in the long term by having a better relationship between city developers and residents. And if we do it transparently and with good involvement, we can really have some great projects.
Ms. Brown, you had your hand up.
So right now, we have supportive modular housing sitting in a TTC yard that's supposed to go to Cummer Street, I believe it is. And I'm really curious to know, like, how can we trust John Tory to get the housing done when it's already sitting in a yard in the TTC? When we talk about supportive housing, the problem is so bad that there are homeless people camping in the parks. And after 8 years of him having this mandate, having 3D printing for housing, and a lot of cheaper ways to create housing, how can we trust you to actually get it done when you're more in tune to just giving in to property owners, as your record shows?
Okay, you've asked a question. Let's get an answer. Mr. Tory, that's you to respond to if you'd like to.
Again, I think it's important to put the facts on the table. The number of affordable housing units in development today is many times in excess of the combined productivity in that regard of previous administrations. We have done something that I'm proud of, which is we have put in place in the last 2 years more than 3,000. The number will be 3,800 completed by the end of this year, supportive housing units, which are instrumental to the well-being. I've been to these units and visited with the people who now occupy them, who in some cases for the first time in their lives have a place they can call home. And they pay rent, but they're getting supports there with some of the mental health issues and other things that confront them that don't fortunately confront most of us. And so I think we need to move forward, and we need to have a mandate to make these changes that I've talked about, in particular with regard to what's called exclusionary zoning, that excludes the other forms of housing you made reference to originally, and that allows for as of right development along the main streets to increase the supply. Because increasing the supply, including a substantial component of affordable housing, we also brought in during this last term inclusionary zoning that causes developers to have to allocate a certain portion of what they build to affordable housing.
Okay, Mr.
So
Tory,
these are the things that have been done.
I'm going to stop you there. Last minute to Mr. Penalosa.
Mr. Tory has mentioned a couple of times the word powers. Toronto, the mayor of Toronto has not lacked powers, has lacked visions and action. Mr. Tory has won every single vote at City Council on anything that is meaningful to him in the last 8 years. Everything. By the way, the strong mayoral powers, every mayor from Oshawa to Niagara, all of them in the extended GTA have opposed it, except Mr. Tory. Is it that all of them are dumb and Mr. Tory is smart? We don't need that. That is taken away. It's taken from the citizens to the councilors, from the councilors to the mayor, and from the mayor to the premier. The premier is going to become like a supra mayor, because every one of the mayoral powers has attached, as long as it's in accordance with the province. So I think that this is totally wrong. We need to work with the citizens. We need to work with city council. We need to empower democracy, and that is a huge excuse for having done practically nothing on affordable housing.
And that is our time on this segment. Okay. We now go on with question 3, and that is about business. What can the city do to make this a better place to establish and run a business? We'll have 5 opening statements, a minute each, and Sarah Climenhaga, you go first.
First of all, we need to think of business as essential. During the last couple of years, we closed independent businesses that were really struggling, and we treated them, you're not essential, but the pot shop's essential. The LCB is essential, but you, mom and dad, store owner, you're not essential. So I think we need to change that. All business is essential. It's part of the fabric of our community. It's the people that make our food, that bring us clothes, whatever it is, art, music. So we need to make business essential, first of all. Second of all, we need to be have Toronto be a place where employees can live. So we have to address this housing issue, because if employees aren't living here, if they're living an hour away, it's going to be a lot more difficult to attract good labor. And then we also need to make it easy for people to get around. So again, I talked about what we can do for transit. Walkability is key. We want Toronto to be easy. It should be easy to get to your workplace. So we need to pay attention to transportation as one of the key success factors for business.
Stephen Punwasi.
So I'm an entrepreneur, so every single part of my platform was about creating new business opportunities and new sort of sources of revenue. We have 2 ideas that we're pumped about, and that's a municipal payment processor and a community venture fund. So a municipal payment processor would leverage the collective size of small and medium-sized businesses and negotiate credit card processing fees down, so they would regain that 1 to 2 points of non-productive costs that large businesses don't have to pay, which they can then reinvest back into their businesses. And the Community Venture Fund is essentially just a venture accelerator to invest in our innovators. Right now, we are known as being the largest real estate bubble in the world. We should be known for fostering business and innovation. And I have 10 seconds.
Which you can give back to the House if you like. Okay. Chloe Brown, you're up next.
So one of the biggest things that I think we can do to help business is modernize our government. As a policy analyst, it's always jarring to me that the government is constantly outsourcing its private technologies to third-source parties when it has the know-how already in-house to do this. As a millennial, I constantly find myself bashing my head against the wall of bureaucracy that is any sector. Whether it's manufacturing, skilled trades, healthcare, there's this wall of corporate bureaucracy that is slowing us all down from actually getting good work done. And that requires us investing in technologies to help us remove some jobs and roles that are no longer helping the process. As someone who is a big advocate for technology, I see that there's a lot of opportunity to make the City of Toronto user-friendly by hiring user experience researchers and designers to change the way that our physical, digital, and social infrastructure match up and give us the same outcomes. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Penalosa.
Well, with the kind of work that I do, I could live anywhere in the world. And I chose to live in Toronto. I came for 2 years so that my children would learn English. And I fell in love with Toronto and with Canada, and I've stayed forever. And the things that I love the most are the ravines, 17% of our area, the fact that half of us were born in another country, and mostly the main streets, the local shops, the independently owned, the small shops, the main streets are the heart and soul of our community. And too many are going broke, basically because there is not enough densities. That's why my Homes for Everyone plan, allowing them to put five stories on top of them, generating the density for them to be successful. But also, all kinds of businesses. We need to see how to retain our people, how to attract people. If we don't do that, the current businesses are going to leave. Quality of life has become the most important tool of economic competitiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Penalosa. Mr. Tory.
Well, I think we have to create the environment in which businesses will want to, can flourish here and stay here, the ones that are created locally, and also businesses will want to come here. I think that there are a number of things. We'll get to red tape. I think it comes up in the next question. After that, I will say taxation is important. I brought in, with the council support, for the first time ever, anywhere in Ontario, a separate small business tax class. It gives small businesses, tens of thousands of them, a 15% reduction in their business taxes. That's going to put money and leave money in their pockets they need, especially after the pandemic, to expand, to create more jobs, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about jobs, and it's about neighborhoods, and it is...
Excuse me. We said interruptions were allowed if they were witty, and that's just not witty enough. Excuse me, sir. You can't, excuse me, sir, we can't do this. We cannot do this. Sir,
he gets up in front of the media
we cannot do this, sir. This is not how we're going to run our meeting, sir. I'm sorry, we're not going to run a meeting this way. Sir, you've been asked to leave, sir. Sir, you've been asked to leave. This is not how we're going to do this, sir. Please leave. Please leave. Please leave, sir. This is not how we're doing this. This is not how we're doing this. This is not how we're doing this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Mr. Tory, I think there were about 20 seconds left on the clock when you were interrupted. You can finish your answer if you'd like.
So the small business tax class, and if I can receive a mandate, I'll increase the discount to 20% and expand the number of businesses that can be part of that. We have to carry on with some of the programs we've put in place that have worked well for businesses, such as Cafe TO, Digital Main Street. And then I think very importantly, and we can discuss this in the debate period, we've got to get people back to their place of work. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take efforts, and I've been discussing that extensively with employers, but we've got to get people back to their place of work, because that's going to help create jobs and economic activity as well.
All right, we have 9 minutes of open debate right now. Mr. Penalosa, you go first.
I just wanted to complement my response that quality of life. The city is falling apart. When people are walking down the street and the garbage cans are overfull, the doors are broken, they go to the parks and the washrooms are closed 8 months of the year, they're going to take public transit and the escalators are broken, people decide to move, especially for affordability. I'm not making this up. People said, oh, no one is going to leave the Silicon Valley in California because they got all the universities. Well, actually, people are moving. There are a lot of the best companies like Hewlett-Packard, like Oracle, they're moving away from the Bay Area and moving to other cities like Texas, states like Texas and Florida. Toronto, we are competing with Quebec, with Alberta, with Florida, with everyone. By the way, Alberta is really shameful. Those of us who use public transit, we have seen everywhere. Alberta is saying, if you want quality of life, come to Alberta. If you want affordable housing, come to Alberta. I mean, Mr. Tory, I know you don't use too much public transit, but you would be really infuriated by seeing every single step with a sign of Alberta attracting people for quality of life.
All right, let's
because
let him
they know that
respond.
after the people, the
Let's-
companies come.
All right, Sarah and Climenhaga,
There we
why
go.
don't you
I'm
come
going
in?
to jump in, and I agree about quality of life. Absolutely. I mean, people live in Toronto because in this virtual world, you can live anywhere, you can do anything. So we want people to live in Toronto. We want to make it a beautiful place, and our parks healthy, all the things, our transit wonderful, our good housing. One of the other things that we need to do is make sure there's a level playing field for business here. Some of the anti-business sentiment that can come in Toronto and elsewhere is because people don't see what's really happening. They see deals seem unfair. What's going on with Uber versus our taxi industry? You know, why do we have these garbage bins that have a hugely long contract and now they fall apart at the drop of the hat? So we need to have a lot more transparency in the dealings at City Hall with business, and I have to say I think it's completely inappropriate that we have a mayor that is being paid by Rogers far more than the salary that most people make. And I think we have to call that out. And as a business community, I feel the business community needs to call that out. You know, if there's no conflict of interest in there, then step away and there will be no worries about conflict of interest. So level playing field, transparency, and then we welcome business. And then we make Toronto a great place for business because we all want business there.
Mr. Tory, there have been a couple of criticisms about you. Do you want to respond to those before I bring Stephen Punwasi in?
Well, the first I'll say is that I think that the important thing that we have to focus on here is the question was about business and what we're going to have to do in order to make sure that we can create jobs. Because it's, you know, at the end of the day, the ability for people to find affordable housing and to look after their families is going to be best enhanced by them having a good, secure job. And I take my record with respect to creating the tax class, with respect to a host of other things, some of which I mentioned, Digital Main Street, Cafe TO, and I take as well my role as the chief salesperson for the city. People forget that before the pandemic, which did interrupt a lot of this work, I was the chief salesperson, and the film industry will tell you, the tech industry will tell you, I didn't do it by myself, but I led the team. I went where I had to go. I received people I had to receive. I made sure that new people who came here to invest were welcomed here in the way that you would expect. And I made sure that people who were already here got the support they needed to flourish. And so I will just say that I am seeking the privilege of serving in this job so I can continue to do that and make sure that people continue to invest here and create jobs here, which was happening at a North American leading pace before the pandemic. And the pandemic did interrupt things. And am I satisfied with some of the things that relate to you know, what you see with your eyes as you go around the city? No, I'm not. Am I aware of the fact that hundreds of our workers were still deployed at the beginning of this year, helping in long-term care homes and in shelters and not able to do the kinds of jobs that will lead things to be better in future years? I'm aware of that. It will be better. It has to be better. It can be better, and I'll make sure that it is.
Stephen Punwasi, you're in next.
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to address Gil and I'm going to address John. With Gil, you were saying that people were leaving Silicon Valley. People are leaving Silicon Valley for places with younger leadership. Sorry, people are leaving Silicon Valley for places with younger leadership. They're moving to Miami, they're moving to Atlanta, they're leaving cities like New York, they're leaving cities like San Francisco. And unfortunately, that's because it's time for the generational power shift, which is occurring. But also to John, didn't you spend most of your time in Florida? How did you know that the city was in
You know,
turmoil over
again,
the past
maybe
2 years?
it's time to put facts on the table. I will
Actually, can we
put up
just hear
against
Chloe first?
Steve. I will put up against anybody the record, and it wasn't perfect, but I think that the steady, reliable, accountable leadership that I showed during the pandemic, leading a team of people that led Toronto to have among the best results in the world in terms of saving lives, getting people vaccinated, I will simply say that I will invite people
Thank you.
to look at that record,
Thank
to
you, audience.
understand that we can put that experience back to work on housing, on transit, and getting things done for people.
We haven't
going
heard from
forward.
Chloe Brown yet.
So John just read the announcements during the pandemic. I personally did not feel any leadership. I heard more announcements from Doug Ford selling me Tim Hortons than how to find a proper vaccine clinic. And I want to shout out Vaccine Hunters because they actually did the work to get us to the places we needed to go. Secondly, when we talk about the world of work, as a 31-year-old policy analyst, I can tell you that there's nihilism that is running through this city because the micromanager that we've hired is taking a salary of $200,000 from us and then $100,000 from Rogers, and he's not doing either job well. As someone who is paying his salary, if I was his employer, I would have to fire him because I wouldn't have to be on this stage if he was answering his emails, taking proactive research, leadership to solve these problems. As a policy analyst, it's my job to do surveys, I do research, environmental scans, and I create recommendations for the John Torys of the world because they don't do their research, because they don't take any action outside of me telling you to do your job. And delegating is not a sign of leadership. It's old and it needs to change, and this is why young people are leaving. There is no hope in the John Torys and the Gil Penalosas of the world because they only wear one hat. The rest of us have to wear 5 hats in order to do our jobs because they just hire people to do their jobs as consultants, board members. This is why we're leaving. I'm not done yet, Sarah. I'm not done yet. But this is the problem. It's these single issue candidates without the ability to look beyond the one thing that they studied for. As a policy analyst, I have worked across a variety of sectors to solve the labor issue. The labor issue that we're facing is a lack of good wages. It's a lack of updating our careers.
Forgive me, I got to jump in and save
go
time for
ahead.
the others. You made a comment to Gil Penalosa, so I should give him a chance to respond to that.
Well, I think that, I led the construction of over 200 parks. I created a successful nonprofit called 880 Cities. What if everything we did in a city had to be great for an 8-year-old and for an 80-year-old? The sidewalk, the crosswalk, the park, the library, the restaurant. If everything is good for the 8 and the 80, it's going to be good for everyone, from 0 to over 100. We need to stop building the tourist Toronto. That is great for a 30-year-old and athletic, and let's create a city for everyone. So I have been doing, but I want to clarify, for the business community, I think it's very important to have peace within the city. John Tory's style of putting everybody against everybody, the young versus the old, the downtown versus the suburbs, the students versus everybody, the homeless versus the police, the rich versus the poor, the young versus the old. No, we need a Toronto for everyone. And that you get that if you have a clear vision and clear action.
I'm jumping in here, and I'm going to call an audible because this segment is out of time, but we still needed to hear from Mr. Tory and Ms. Climenhaga on some of the issues that came up here, so we're going to steal some of that time from the next segment. I'm calling an audible. Mr. Tory, you had your hand up, you wanted to
I'll just
respond.
put a couple of things on the record. I think on the question of unity, if you can think back to the Toronto as it was in 2014 when I was elected as mayor, I think it's quite different today in terms of people working together, the council working better, working with the other governments, which is crucial. Toronto cannot do any of these big things, transit and housing and so on its own. And the second thing I'll say, just in response to a comment that was made earlier, I have a great deal of hope for this city, a great deal of hope. All the right stuff is here. We just need to get some of the big things done. We need to carry on with the partnerships we've established, good ones, with the other two governments, which is a first. And we need to make sure that we have experienced leadership to deal with what are going to be some choppy waters ahead when it comes to the finances. Experienced leadership is going to see us through that.
Ms. Climenhaga, last word to you.
Just since vaccination was mentioned, I do want to talk about mandates because it affects labor and employees is an important issue. We can't go forward with these types of mandates that restrict access to labor. And arbitrators have said it's not the right thing to fire people for vaccine mandates. We shouldn't have them in place. And so I think we need to just realize this is another issue affecting retention of employees and affecting the people, the feeling of Toronto. And I can tell you, while a lot of people here may agree with vaccine mandates, a lot of Torontonians do not. And so we need to really look at how we deal with public health. Is it authoritarian or is it through choice and education?
I know that there, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We should just say, thank you. Ma'am, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let us say for the record, excuse me, we can't do this. We cannot have everybody yelling out at once. We have 5 candidates on the stage because the Board of Trade invited 5 candidates. I want to point out that Nia Singh is also running for mayor, and I think I see him in the audience right there, and he is running for mayor as well. And we put that on the record, and he has some interesting things to say about the subject that was just raised, and you can go to his website, I imagine, and find out more about that. Okay, can we now move on to the next segment, which is question 4, and it is in fact about red tape and whether there is too much in this city on business for them to operate properly. And we're going to do 5 one-minute statements, starting with Stephen Punwasi.
Yeah, so red tape's code for regulations, and some exist for good reasons and some don't. Eliminating them doesn't guarantee that the city will be able to execute anything any faster, because we do have low red tape situations where the city hasn't been able to execute. In the automotive industry, they have red tape, and rather than, they can build a car really fast if you eliminated all of the regulations, but it's not something that benefits all of society. So what did they do? They learned to automate, innovate, and streamline their processes, and that's what our open source city plan does. We're going to build city software in collaboration with other municipalities, some that have already agreed to work with me on this, and we will collect and streamline approval processes, create new systems for data, so that we can actually accelerate and pinpoint the bottlenecks that hold up all of these business applications and permits, as well as other municipal bottlenecks.
Okay, Chloe Brown, you're up next.
So to deal with red tape, one of the things that I would like to do is go sector by sector to figure out what processes and operations that could be digitalized. As a policy analyst at the Future Skills Center, I work with these projects every day, and one of my favorites is the Virtual Recruitment Center, which is just virtualizing and digitizing the trades recruitment center, and that is really helpful when we're talking about a labor shortage. And there's so much opportunity that is currently lacking in our government because it doesn't ask the users what it needs. Right now, the systems are designed for reporting, so like as an analyst, like I get all my numbers for reporting, but people who use the system, it's not friendly for them, and this is where the development industry, like they get a lot of gruff, but the permit system's not built for them. It's built for bureaucrats to report numbers, and I would like to work with workers to redevelop these systems directly, and I think there's a huge opportunity there to save money on overhead by moving to technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Penalosa.
Well, Mr. Tory talks about leadership and experience. Well, I have more leadership and more experience. I have an MBA from one of the top 20 schools in the world, UCLA. Actually, I've been selected about one of the 100 most inspirational alumni. I have run successfully organizations in the public, in the private, in the not-for-profit. And in all of them, if you have not ended red tape within the first 2 years, you are out. Mr. Tory has not ended red tape in over 8 years, and he wants more time for it. With our homes for everyone, we're going to end red tape. In the renovation, people are going to be able to renovate as of right and one-stop shop to get all the answers. On all of the arterials, people are going to be able, developers are going to do homes as of right. So that means that they are going to jump 3 to 4 years. It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be faster. That is ending red tape. So let's not see what Mr. Tory is going to do in the next 4. Let's see what he has not done in the last 8.
Mr. Tory.
We have taken, as a fact, many steps to modernize the city government so that it's to the point now where all new and renewal business licenses can be done online, fees can be paid online. We've taken substantial portions of the city's interaction with businesses and people online, but we have more to do. There's no question about that. The government has to be more nimble, and so it's clearly set out in my platform on which I'm seeking a mandate, things ranging all the way from literally finding a way to guarantee we cut in half the time it takes for people in the hospitality business to get a permit. But I think something that's more innovative and that will rely on, I hope, people like Stephen to participate, is that we're going to ask the local technology industry here, and it's going to be confined to them, to have a competition for them to identify things they can see ways to improve. There will be actually rewards for those who can suggest apps or other things we can do to improve the process of government. It'll be done within the next year, 2023, so that we can have the know-how of our local tech community put to work and reward them with hopefully what will be job creation for them.
All right,
as
Ms.
well.
Climenhaga, the last minute to you.
Just quick question for the audience, since I believe in participatory democracy. Could someone put up their hand, or anyone, how many bylaws do you think the City of Toronto has? Just guess. Don't put your hand up if you don't know. Anyone? Hand up. Guess.
Do you know?
Anyone? Come on, one of you guys. Guess how many bylaws? 500? Another guess. I'm running out of time. Quick, guess something else. No one wants to guess. 1,000. 200,000 bylaws in the City of Toronto, around 40,000 employees. So each employee could spend their entire job enforcing 5 bylaws, and maybe we'd enforce them. So that's ridiculous, and that's why we have such a lack of clarity, such a lack of enforcement. So, I mean, let's start with that. Let's start with eliminating everything that's not necessary, that's not enforced, that's not important, and prioritize what is important. And then, let's just take an attitude towards permits. Is something going to be good for the city? If it is, get rid of the permit process. And let's have faster response times. Answer our phones within 24 to 72 hours. All of these things can make our city work so much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now are into a 7-minute debate period. We had to steal a minute from earlier. And Mr. Tory, by lot, you have the first response in this debate period.
I do indeed, and thank you, Steve. And I think, you'll hear a lot of things said today about things we could do in an ideal world where if there were no constraints at all. But, I often get asked about by people that we should have more permits that are required for more things, because everything that happens in a big city of 3 million people has an impact on somebody else. And so I think the challenge for us is to find ways for people to deal with the government more easily. I'm going to appoint, as part of this platform, a red tape champion on the council whose job it's going to be to identify places where we may not have to have permits anymore. But I think the real nub of what we have to do is to make it easier for people to deal with government and get out of the way, so that they can do the most important thing in terms of the overall well-being of the community, which is to create jobs and economic activity, because that is what is going to help. And I think it's going to help as well. My 5-point housing plan is a major effort to reduce red tape, as you want to call it, which is to make it easier to get approved mid-rise development along the transit corridors and along the major streets, and to get approved alternate options for housing in neighborhoods right across the city. That is going to be a major impediment that will be removed, that will make it possible
Mr. Tory,
for people to move forward.
Open discussion here. Who wants in? Chloe.
So when we're talking about red tape, a lot of these processes that we have come to know as red tape is corporate processes. When I'm at work, I have to ask 6 people before I can send an email. It has to go through comms, it has to go through a variety of people, and that's because we have over-corporatized our processes. There's a lot of talented, really capable people in the city that if you actually invested directly into them, they could be producing the results you need. They don't need a contest or a lottery to be given opportunity. You just give them the money. So this is where, I'm sorry, but I got a beef with you, because it's you're constantly giving our money to businesses to solve problems that I went to school for, that all of us went to school for. And I'm really just sick of this idea that red tape is people. Red tape is the fact that corporations are delaying opportunity for young people to actually have leadership in this city.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because I got to make sure everybody gets in. Who else wants in? Mr. Penalosa?
When I spend 70% of my campaign in the suburbs, and when on Saturday, Sunday, I go to the parks in Scarborough, in Etobicoke, lots of immigrants. And they're very concerned because they came. More than half of us who live in Toronto were born in another country. But we came because of the dream of Canada and Toronto, and they tell me that once they're here, they hit a wall because of red tape. All of a sudden, we need nurses, but they're flipping hamburgers. We need teachers, but they're cleaning floors or driving Ubers. And they go to the city hall and say, it's not my problem. They go to the province, oh, it's not my problem. They go to the federal, oh, it's not my problem. If I am the mayor of a city where more than half of the people were born in another country, the issue of the immigrants is my problem. And also, so a lot of this is how to end that red tape, and this is doable, and it's going to be a win-win-win to do it. Toronto has an enormous amount of experience and knowledge underutilized. Everyone is going to be better if we eliminate red tape and work with everyone in the city.
Mr. Punwasi.
You know that the mayor can't regulate things like nurses, right?
Of course, but as a mayor, I can, the immigrant that is having 2 and 3 jobs to survive cannot go to the Minister of Labor at the province. But I, as a mayor, can request a meeting with the Minister of Labor and see how can we eliminate that red tape. I need to take leadership.
So you're saying that the municipal government will now just be, rather than using their direct provincial representative, they need to use the city's representative?
It has
to
not
start
worked through them.
negotiating with the
So
province?
I think the mayor has to be a leader. You know, I think that John has abdicated the city to the province. So he is allowing the city to be run by Ford. And I think that the mayor, instead of being the cheerleader of Premier Ford, the mayor has to be the mayor of Toronto. And part of it,
We've not heard from Ms.
part of it might
Climenhaga
be
yet.
dealing with the ministers, part of it might be at the federal level,
Okay.
part of it might be with the private sector.
Mr.
So I do
Penalosa,
think.
we haven't heard from Sarah Climenhaga yet.
Yeah, just because the mayor mentioned that sometimes some people want more permits, this idea of eliminating unnecessary bylaws, it's not a pie in the sky, unrealistic idea. It's something we actually have to do. We can't micromanage the city anymore. It's not working. We are not enforcing these bylaws. We are not dealing with these permits. So we have to deal with reality. We have to deal with the actual fact that we do have labor shortages. We have to deal with the fact that it's taking months to get a permit. So that's why it's not unrealistic to say, let's look at those 200,000 bylaws and get rid of a lot of them. Let's look at our permit processes and get rid of them. Sure, every neighbor would like us to, get involved in every single dispute, every single type of thing, but the city can't do it. So rather than pretending it can and failing, the city has to say, no, actually, we're going to turn this over to your communities to solve. We're going to have clear, high standards that we do enforce, and the rest, we can't do it anymore. We're buckling under the weight.
Okay, Mr. Tory.
I think this whole discussion really shows that a lot of this is about partnerships, because our system of government, as complex as it can be, does disperse responsibilities as between all 3 levels of government. And when I had to fight for the city against the public health cuts, I did. And I went door to door canvassing, among other things, to take on that poor decision that was made and get it reversed. And the same partnership that got the transit deal is going to be what is necessary to move us forward in a number of these areas under discussion today. And I hope people will ask themselves the question, who do they think is going to be best to maintain the partnerships that are in place that have led to progress on housing, to the transit deal, and to the funding that is coming our way from those other governments? Because Toronto cannot do these things alone. Any of the things that have been mentioned here today, it's going to require the right approach that says you stand up for the city's interests, but you also make sure the city gets the investment that it needs to move itself forward.
Okay, less
And
than a
that
minute.
partnership
Anybody
is an
else want
important
in?
question.
Chloe Brown, go ahead.
So these partnerships that John is talking about, regardless of who's leader, they will happen. Every government has its own agenda. Every MP, MPP has their own agenda. John is not the only person that can talk to people and reach an agreement. That's literally my job. I just find it so incredulous, because it's like when you're always at the top sitting on a stair on the corporate ladder, I guess it's really hard to imagine that other people can do their jobs. But every day, all of us work with people that we don't like and still get the job done, because that's what we're hired for. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket surgery. So yeah, you have experience sitting in boardrooms, but your records shows that all you do is collect dust. From Smart Track to your housing plan, your experience is collecting dust, and this is why we have the red tape that we have, because you haven't been proactively leading the business community.
I need to give him 20 seconds to respond to that. Go ahead, Mr. Tory.
I'll simply say, Steve, just by way of the great thing about our system is the people will render their judgment next Monday, and they get to decide. And I think they will look at the partnerships, they will look at the experience that is going to be necessary to see us through some very uncertain times, and they will decide that experienced leadership and the kind of commitment I have to collaboration and to cooperation and to partnerships with the other governments and to getting some of the big things done, like the transit deal, like the progress we're making on housing with much more to be done,
Okay.
That is what they'll pick.
Very good. We're down to our last question here, and the question is this. It's on revenue. What needs to happen on raising more revenue to deal with what could be a $1 billion budgetary shortfall? Chloe Brown, you get the first of the 5 responses on this.
All right. So, as I had said before, land value tax, there's a desperate need to modernize our property assessment methods. Right now, not everyone who lives in a property is the landowner, and we have this huge problem where when we talk about tax fairness, not everyone who lives here is paying their fair share of taxes. Additionally, it's like the churches and charities are some of the largest landowners, but they're not paying taxes. We're subsidizing a large group of people in this city as working class people, so we need to reset that. Additionally, looking at how we use our funding intelligently is a big problem. We're constantly spending on consultations, reports. We went from Toronto Strong Neighborhoods, anti-poverty, poverty reduction, just to reinvent the wheel. We actually need to just invest money in getting smarter technology to help us manage the workload. And at this point, there's so much opportunity with our tech community. Shout out to Civic Tech TO, because that's where I started to learn how to be a citizen developer.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Penalosa.
Well, first, let's keep in mind that the province just announced that they got over 2.5 billion surplus, and the federal is over 10 billion surplus. And Toronto is by far the city that contributes the most to that surplus. So we need to have access to a part of that surplus. Second, we need to stop irresponsible spending. As the Gardener. The Gardener was a project that was falling apart, and some people wanted to tear it down and do a boulevard, 500 million. Some wanted to fix it, 500 million. But Mr. Tory wanted to do a hybrid, move it and rebuild it. That is not happening anywhere. $1.8 billion, 700 per every man, woman, and child. By the way, the eastern part, the design is not there, the tender is not there, nothing, so it can be rethought immediately. And third, on the budget, we need to have a zero budget. Every single expense in the city has to be reevaluated from scratch, not just give a percentage to everybody. Zero budget and move from there.
Thank you, Mr. Penalosa. Mr. Tory.
Well, I think that what we have to look at is why the credit rating agencies of the city, for example, who look objectively at our books and say the city's been prudently financially managed and maintain our credit rating in place, why would they say those things if it wasn't true? And I'm proud of that record. We brought in 8 budgets where, we're back to the question here of revenue. The one way not to do it, and the one way that we cannot do it, is by increasing the problem of affordability that people in the city face today by having property tax increases that cause seniors not to be able to stay in their homes, or cause young people not to be able to sort of manage that precise calculation they have to make on mortgage payments. We have managed to keep property taxes at or below the rate of inflation. I'm saying going forward it has to be below the rate of inflation given where that is today, at the same time as we've dramatically expanded capital for the TTC, dramatically expanded the money made available for housing, brought in emotion-centered care for people in long-term care. So we have to have prudent financial management. We have to look for ways in which we can find efficiencies in the government to finance the continued expansion of services.
Ms. Climenhaga, you're up next.
So I won't ask another question because last time my husband had to jump in and save me, so thank you, Paul, for your answer. But here's another fact, another figure. So the budget summary, just the summary alone, is 900 pages long. So I think we need to start out by making our budget clear, transparent, understandable by every resident in this city, or at least every resident that wants to know. And there's ways to do that. Once we've done that, then we can find where are we wasting money? Because I can tell you we are wasting money. There are things that we wouldn't all agree on spending. And so we need to ask residents, how would you like your money spent? We need to involve them. It's residents' money that's being spent on city things. So we need to make the budget clear, accessible, and participatory budgeting. So that's kind of the first place that we need to start. Then we can move on to where do we spend money and where do we raise more.
Mr. Punwasi.
Yeah, so we're heading into a recession, so we can't really start taxing people more or raising property taxes right now. It's really the wrong time to start hitting families when they're being impacted by things like inflation. So that's why our plan focused on diversified revenue, cost controls, and fraud reduction. So we need financing innovation, like my TTC plan that I mentioned earlier, but we also need to start controlling costs. How many times have you seen the city rip up the same street 3 times in the same year for 3 different services? We can synchronize maintenance and reduce that, and at the same time we can install municipal broadband so that we can have our own city internet service so businesses have a resilient backbone to operate with. And then there's fraud. The Auditor General for Toronto said that there was a 42% increase in fraud reports. They don't even have resources to actually look into all of this, and they're recovering millions.
Thank you, Mr. Punwasi. We now have open discussion for a little less time than planned because we've run over here a little bit. Sarah Climenhaga, you get the first kick at it.
I just wanted to talk about when I say waste in city spending, that doesn't mean libraries. That doesn't mean we cut libraries. That doesn't mean pools. That doesn't mean we close community centers. When politicians talk about saving money and holding the line, those are the first things to go. Those aren't the first things that residents want to go. That's not why residents are asking for lower taxes because they want to cut those things. They're asking for lower taxes or at least affordable taxes because of what they're concerned that their money is spent on, like Stephen's mentioning, endless non-understandable roadwork. So I'm committed to having what we need so our city thrives, and I'm also committed to not precluding any action. So yes, I'm a property owner. I don't particularly want high property taxes, but I'm not going to absolutely rule that out without consulting with the majority of people in Toronto. People have told me, some people have said they do want their taxes increased. Others say they want it lower. So let's talk to the entire city and see where we want to raise money, how we want to raise money, are there other measures, and what do we really want to spend money on? And that's how we have a great city, that because we're all involved now. It's not just we vote once, 4 years, the mayor does whatever they want.
Let me get Mr. Penalosa in here now.
I want to, since you asked about revenues, the gardener is both expenses and revenues, because Mr. Tory got council to approve something that is $700 per every man, woman, and child. If we stop the gardener and we do the rational thing, a boulevard, we are going to save at least $500 million. And also we're going to open up space for thousands of units of housing. So we're going to get revenue, we're going to get funding, and we're going to do housing. And also when I'm talking about zero budget, evaluating everything from scratch. I'll give you an example. Maybe we come up to the conclusion that we don't need the horses on the police. With half of the budget that we are spending on the horses of the police, we could open all of the libraries every Sunday. We have probably the best library system in the world, but we are closing most of them on Sundays, at nights, and many of the working people, that's the only time that they can actually go to the libraries. So that is how we should stop irresponsible spending and do the rational thing in budgets.
Mr. Tory, can we do some of those things?
Sorry, was that Steve?
Can we do some of those things he just suggested?
Well, you know, again, I don't have the luxury in the job that I actually hold at the moment of kind of making these kinds of commitments. I mean, when you look at something like the mounted unit in the police, we share that mounted unit with other cities, just as we don't have a helicopter and York Region does, and we share the helicopter with them. These are common sense things that actually save money in the end, and sometimes it can be code for defunding the police, which I just want you to know I will not do, because that is not something that is going to be. We've kept the increase to 1.7% in the fastest growing city in North America. We've managed to finance neighborhood policing and a host of other police modernizations and reforms while constraining the budget, and I think that's the way to do it, not to defund the police. And with respect to the gardener, I'll simply say this. That was a decision made 7 years ago. And I am not for turning back and let's start that all over again. We made the decision. We did something that was rational, that is going to keep the transportation moving around the city at the same time as freeing up a huge portion of land for new waterfront use. And that is the path that I will be on if I get a new mandate.
Ms. Brown, please, to you.
So it's one of those things where it's just like, I think it's very strange that any of these candidates can come up with a wish list of things and say that they're going to keep property taxes low. He's done that for 8 years, and look where we are now. He's funded the police, and where are we now? We still have problems with homelessness. We have problems with drug overdoses and violence in this city because the way that they're doing things is not working. So this is where people want to keep their taxes low because these guys are not spending their tax dollars effectively. When we talk about defunding the police, it's not just taking money out of police services, it's moving it towards mental health care so that we can get people off the streets and into supported communities, bringing down the cost of hospitalization and incarceration.
Stephen Punwasi, why don't you come in?
Did I look like I had something?
No, all right, fine. Mr. Penalosa, go ahead. You had your hand up. Go ahead.
I want to clarify, because what I said as an example, when we do zero budget, if we find that the horses are not necessary, with that, we could invest in opening the libraries. By the way, this is about safety. When I'm talking about not cutting the libraries, not cutting the recreation programs, it's because that is also about safety. When we have the youth of the city without programs, for example, I'm suggesting let's work with the school boards and open up the gymnasiums in the evenings so that the young people are not running around the streets but are actually doing activities, arts and sports and activity. That's about safety.
Because
If we don't do that now, 5 years from now, we're going to have a huge problem. When the police intervenes, it's because maybe we have not done the right things 5 or 10 years before.
So education
So
falls
I'm
under
not
the
talking about
province.
defunding the police. I'm talking about evaluating
We've got a
every
minute
cost
left here.
from everybody,
Let's share
including
the time.
the police.
Let's share the time. Sarah
yeah, I just
Climenhaga.
wanted to ask everyone, do we want a mayor and do we want 25 people spending $15 billion, or do we want 3 million people having a say in how we spend our city budget? It just doesn't make sense anymore to have these decisions made behind closed doors, no access to the information, very little understanding, decisions that are made, with lobbyists, with all sorts of different things. So let's bring it open. Let's have all of us have a say in it. It just can't be the way it is
30
now.
seconds left to Ms. Brown.
So Sarah doesn't seem like she's gone to the City of Toronto's website, because everything that she has listed, I could find it on the City of Toronto's website.
Absolutely
And this is
not
what
true.
cost us. No, this is what cost us money. Politicians coming in and having no idea how policy making or government works. That is the red tape. Because everything that she is saying, I could find the budget online in a PowerPoint presentation in 15 slides. These are not issues. The issue is that people don't take the time, particularly politicians, to do their research. So
Friends,
we
I've
need
got to jump in
leadership.
because the clock says we're done. Jan De Silva's going to come up and wrap things up.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know this audience wants to join me in thanking the candidates for coming today and participating in this debate.
Steve,
Police services has the single biggest line item on the operating budget of $1.1 billion. There needs to be divestment and investment into care and well-being of communities, addressing the social determinants of health and equity. This is a must to put our communities first.
okay. I want to thank everyone for your engagement. The city is incredibly important. Our future is incredibly important. I want to thank all of our candidates. It's very clear there are things you don't agree with each other. There are things I was not necessarily always in agreement with, but it was very impactful to listen to you put your point of view. It's very clear to me the heart and soul that you want to put towards our city. So I want to thank all of the candidates. Please join me in a very big round of applause. Steve, as always, you did an excellent job of managing both events on stage and through the audience. So thank you very much for the pro that you are. It was excellent. And just to repeat what I said at the outset, this election comes at a very critical juncture. We're trying to get through a pandemic. We're competing against other centers. We've got lots of wonderful growth in our city, but with that comes challenges, and there's complexity. And the job that I have, the organization I run, we have to work with all levels of government. So we see the complexity of trying to make a post-Confederation model where the city is the smallest part of the pie, when our city is the biggest part of the country. Making that work is incredibly challenging. So get out and vote on October 24th. We need everyone to have their say in the city. I want to thank all of our candidates for joining us here today. Thank you.